about noon, so we'll go ahead and get started. First of all, thank you for being here, and thank our panelists for taking time to come and speak with us today about writing in their disciplines. I'm Jessica Pisano. I'm Associate Director of Writing, First Year Writing here at UNCA. There's sign-in sheets over there. I think I've directed most of you to sign in, but if you haven't signed in, that's your way of letting your professor know that you did attend today and you get whatever perks they're giving you for attending today. The way we'll do this is that I've invited each of our panelists to speak for about 5 minutes, introducing themselves and then speaking a little bit about writing in their discipline. And then after that, we'll open it up for questions. So I invite you to, as you're thinking, hi, you're welcome to take a seat, yeah. As you're listening, I invite you to jot down your ideas for questions, okay? What it is you want to know, what it is you want to understand about the writing that they do in their academic work here at UNCA and beyond. So help me please welcome our panelists.
So, my name is Moretta Cameron. I am the chair of the Department of Computer Science. And I know some of you are probably going, computer science and writing, and you probably have a similar attitude that I had when I was a first-year student. I was interested in mathematics. I knew I was going to take a few courses in computer science and realized later I was going to major in computer science and math, and had the attitude of, I'm going into computer science, I'm going to avoid all of that writing because it's all subjective anyway. That's what I thought. I took freshman colloquium is what it's called here. In my day, it was called freshman seminar, and we had to write book reports, book reviews, and never will forget one particular experience where I waited until the night before, yes, I procrastinated, waited till the night before, turned in the paper, had no problem with it because in high school I had written papers the night before and they were read in front of the class and I got A's on them. So of course I could write something the night before and get an A in college. And I get my paper back and the comments were, I don't know what you said and I can't get over how you said it. D. Of course, my little ego was bruised. And I would admit, by the time I was a senior, I totally understood I deserved every comment that was made and deserved that D. Okay. Found out quite quickly that there definitely was a lot of motivation for writing in my discipline. In my discipline, I think most people understand that we develop software, we write code. But in writing that code has to be documented. And it has to be written in such a way that your colleague would be able to understand what the algorithm is doing, what your intentions are meant, what's the purpose, and can do it quickly. I mean, it is a matter of production. In terms of academia, we have to write journal articles, conference articles, and technical papers. And just in case there's a few people that are like some of my students in the major right now who say, I'm not going to grad school. Well, it's becoming more and more fashionable for people that are in industry to attend conferences. And in attending conferences, they will write technical reports or they will write conference articles that will be peer reviewed. In terms of working in industry, we have to do code reviews. You can't just write a program and say, oh, it works, here it is. Usually, some of your colleagues will have to go through your code, make sure that it's meeting the specifications, and write a review, commenting on what's great about the code and writing a critique on what's maybe could be done better. Never forget, all of us have to communicate as far as email is concerned. Never forget that in terms of your professional development, you have to write your resume, your cover letter, okay? For those of you that are looking something a little bit more, even more challenging, consider in one of our sub-disciplines, artificial intelligence is becoming very much fashionable to talk about the effect of artificial life forms in terms of our society. What will happen one day, I think some of you may be sitting in a legislative body making decisions on how software affects us, okay? In terms of those of us that are in the field, we have to communicate with our legislatures and usually involved to make sure that the wording in those documents are really accurate and very specific to what we do, okay? So there's the communication. I hear a lot of people talk about, oh, what we will do is have someone in between the IT person, the IT professional, and between the rest of the world to do the technical writing. And most of us are not really reading technical writing. We have to be able to communicate with our audience, with our lay audience, who are very intelligent people, maybe not knowledgeable of the domain, but very intelligent people who have to make decisions, and you have to write in such a way that they understand and will be able to enact on that information. So just to give you that part of, and I'm probably gone over my 5 minutes, so I think I'll stop with that. Thank you.
Do you want me to go next? I'm Grant Hardy. I'm from the history department. And our discipline is more traditionally sort of writing, so I knew what I was getting into from the very beginning. There are maybe 3 kinds of writing that happen in our department. The first are analytical papers, so we'll assign a primary source or let students choose a primary source, and then their job is to read that as carefully as they can, try to read in between the lines, try to see what the assumptions are behind it, and tell us a little bit about what's being said on the page, but also the kinds of thought processes and cultural assumptions that go behind that. So that unpacking of primary sources. And the second kind is research papers, pretty traditional research papers, so they need to have a thesis, you need to have an argument to make some sort of point that might be wrong or right or wrong, and then your job as a writer would be to persuade your professor that you're right, that your point of view is correct, and it's backed up by evidence. Evidence that oftentimes comes to primary sources. With longer research papers, there needs to be some engagement with what other scholars have said about that from secondary sources. And then we like footnotes in our discipline. Footnotes have 2 functions. One is they allow the reader to know exactly where you got the information that you're using in the paper. And that happens. So I get something, I say, I've never heard of that before, that's sort of strange. And then I should be able to go from that page, that footnote, to the library and find the exact page in the exact book that my student found that information from. That's the first point of footnotes. The second one is in footnotes, you can carry on a little conversation. Footnotes is where historians trash their colleagues to say, somebody else wrote about this, but it's really stupid, and their arguments aren't thought together really, and that's actually really a lot of fun. It's fun unless you're the subject of other people's footnotes, which I've had that happen before as well. Okay, so 2 things, analytical papers, research papers, and then in the history department, there's a senior research paper that's like 30 pages or so, and that's oftentimes a challenge because you have to develop an argument over lots of pages. I once had one student, he was an okay student, not a great student, but an okay student, and he got to the senior thesis seminar, and he said, I love this. Went down to Raleigh, worked in the archives, found all kinds of stuff, got very excited. I said, if you love doing this, you should think about being a history professor. That's the third kind of writing, is the kind of writing that's done professionally that we do. Lots of articles, journal articles, and then especially in our field, books matter. To be able to develop an argument that is sophisticated and nuanced enough and has enough detail that you can carry that argument over 200, 300 pages is a real accomplishment. And it's what sort of pushes the field forward. There are different kinds of books. There are monographs that are for other scholars mostly on pretty detailed things. My first book was about a historian named Sima Qian in the early Han Dynasty, about 90 BCE or so. It was a really good book, published by a great press. Maybe 1,000 people have ever read that in the history of the world. No, there's 1,000 copies, and fewer people than that have read that, I'm sure. But it was pretty good. The other kind of writing is sort of more popular, where it's done with historical professional standards, but it's written about things that regular people are interested about, and sometimes written in ways that attract attention from others. In our department, the person who's probably best at that is Dr. Pierce, who's written a really great book on the history of NASCAR, which will actually sell, unlike my books on early Chinese history. And he just wrote a book on moonshine, which again is sort of interesting. Dr. Rizzo, that'll sell too, as well. It'll be a companion gift. Dr. Rizzo in our department has written on the French Revolution, but she's also written a textbook, which is a sort of in between, kind of for the professionals and for ordinary audiences. And then the person who writes probably the most detailed, most sophisticated technical books in our department is probably Dr. Trabulsi. We're not sure how good his books are because he writes them in Arabic. And he writes about medieval Arabic manuscripts and religious traditions. But those are very, very detailed. So 3 kinds of writing: analytical papers, research papers, and then professional writing. Thanks.
I'm Ashley Maraguez in political science, and I thought I would talk about what I think is maybe unique or challenging about writing in political science. And I think for the most part, political science is a lot like writing in other disciplines insofar as the 2 things you need to care about the most are your argument and your evidence. So whether you're a first year like intro class student or you've had your PhD for 20 years, your work's going to be evaluated on how convincing and novel and logical your theory or argument is and how effective your evidence is. But I think the thing that perhaps is different about political science, or at least most prominent in political science relative to other disciplines, is the need to kind of hide your political beliefs and kind of put them in your back pocket and not let them dictate your arguments or your research. Because you have to, in order to do political science, be more objective and divorce yourself from those biases you may have, at least for the purposes of like academic writing that you'll do in the classroom, or at least professionally like I do, publishing in journals or books. So the way we phrase it in political science, which is kind of weird for outsiders, is that we don't study politics, we study political phenomenon, and we try to explain why they're happening. And so our task is not to explain how the political world should be, it's to explain how the political world is. And so that's kind of dissatisfying, so a lot of our students come in like very passionate about their political beliefs, and we tell them to kind of tone it down a little bit. And so your political beliefs and your values can certainly motivate your research, and they should, but they shouldn't dictate how your research or writing is done in practice. So it needs to be more objective. And I think the biggest misunderstanding about our discipline is that political science is indeed a science. So we actually follow the scientific method, much like the biologies or other natural sciences do. And so our research papers actually look a lot more like those in the natural sciences do than perhaps something in history. They're a little bit less narrative in some ways, and in some ways they're kind of a midpoint between the humanities and the natural sciences. But our writing style very much mimics the kind of steps of the scientific method. And so that, in that respect, it is much more like a natural science in terms of the writing style. And for that reason, we do have to be very objective in our research, provide very objective evidence, and try to draw unbiased conclusions from that, which I think is similar to a lot of fields. But I think it's particularly hard in political science when we all have very strong political beliefs, and that really doesn't have a place in our academic writing. Of course, however, there are other kinds of political writing that we all engage in, and that I include myself in that, which is like we write op-eds for the newspaper, or we write for mainstream media where our audience isn't other students of political science or other scholars. It's more for lay people who are trying to make recommendations about what policy solution would be the most effective. And I've written, for example, for Vox.com, and there I share my biases. But even when I'm doing that, I still kind of focus on having a logical argument and providing objective evidence to back up why I believe something's wrong and something else is the correct solution. And so even when you're showing your biases, you do have to kind of stick to that same format of providing at least evidence that's objective, even when your argument itself isn't. And in our department in political science, I think most of us focus on kind of the scientific research in class assignments. I know for my intro class, I focus on I give them the topic, and I force them to come up with an argument and provide evidence in favor on either side of the argument that I've offered them, or the topic rather. For my upper level classes, I actually have students come up with their own research topic, and they follow the scientific method to actually execute that. And our senior thesis course for political science kind of forces students to use that kind of scientific method straitjacket. So the writing is kind of different than you might expect going into political science. There's a big misunderstanding about it, and one thing I will say is if you're like me, you went into political science interested in politics and history and other disciplines like that, writing like a scientist is really hard and it takes practice, and the only way to kind of become a master at it is to do it over and over and over again. It's not an easy task, it's a process. I'll leave it there.
I'm Angel Kaur. I teach neuroscience here at UNC Asheville. My background is in cell molecular biology, and I focused on the neuroscience principle stuff. And so I am the natural scientist that you would think about. The kind of writing that we would do professionally is very dry, very heavy writing. It includes journal articles that some of you might have had to come across in some of your intro courses. They can include review articles, which are really just synthesizing information that other people published in journal articles into a more complete history on one particular topic. It can include protocols and book chapters, and those are more focused on established either methods or established knowledge that we can then communicate with students as this is not controversial anymore. We know that DNA is a double helix, and we can put that in a textbook. And the other thing that we do as scientists is write grants. Grant writing can be really similar to review writing in that you're taking information from a bunch of other people's work, synthesizing it into this idea of here's where I think the hole is, and I'm going to fix this hole of the knowledge that we have, and ask people for money. And so the kind of work that we do requires people to give us a significant amount of money because we have to buy a lot of consumable items. So grant writing is a really important thing that scientists will do professionally. How that translates into what we do in our classrooms, students need to be able to read and interpret journal articles and then write journal articles in a similar way. So a lot of our instruction is both in learning to read stuff and then learning to mimic that style to write stuff. The 100 level biology classes that you take, again, because I'm a biologist but I teach neuroscience, they do require you to write a journal style article based on data that you've collected. That means that you're writing an abstract, which is 250 word summary of what you've done in the entirety of the paper. You're writing an introduction that pulls from other stuff that you're trying to lead the reader to. This is why I think this question is really cool. You have methods and results sections that are much more specific to exactly what you've done, and then the discussion section where you can do a little bit of the footnoting that Grant was talking about and kind of persuade people that your thing is better than what other people have done. What that ends up meaning is when you're doing science writing, you're doing in part a very informative and what's the word I want to use? No, informative writing, where your methods and your results are going to be really much like, this is what we did, right? This is what we found. There's no opinion there. Whereas the other half of the paper, the intro and discussion, can have a little bit of opinion, so it's more persuasive writing. So we do have to straddle that as well, because you do want people to buy into why you think these things are important, both for grant writing and for journal article writing. But you do have to stay very well within, this is the data that we have to work with, and you have to interpret that data faithfully. The thing that students have the most difficulty with in science writing is the format. There's a very specific type of format that you're supposed to follow. Try writing an abstract. 250 words to encompass a whole paper. It's stupidly difficult and really hard to give an example of this is a good abstract. So the format is something that people struggle with a lot. The other thing is you have to be really succinct. That's not just true for a 250 word abstract, that's true across the board. I don't want to hear about a billion years ago there was man, blah, blah, blah. No, get to the point. That's what we do in science writing. And so for students that have taken courses similar to Lang 120, where the style of writing that you might encounter is more elaborate, and then you switch to going into science writing where it needs to not be elaborate, you just need to get to what you're talking about, and that can be a little bit of a difficulty. So most of the intro classes focus on science writing, but as we get into more upper level coursework, I like to focus on science communication, because especially where we are right now, being able to take that really heavy science stuff and translate it into something that everyone can understand the actual science behind it without diluting what the science was is really important. What that looks like for my classroom is I have students put together poster presentations based on popular topics that people might be interested in, but from a truly scientific perspective. I've had people write and record podcasts. I've had people write and post Wikipedia articles that are just building out the knowledge that exists. And you realize that writing a wiki article is actually quite different than anything else you might encounter in a classroom. But it's a way to take information that you have now learned to understand and bring it to other people that might not have all that skill set yet. And that's something that I think is really important, and so I incorporate into my classes a lot. The one last thing I will say, if I never have to say this to another student again, it would be great. We do not quote directly in science writing. This is something that happens in a lot of other kinds of writing, but if I see a quote in a paper that you've written for me, I will cross it out and say paraphrase and cite, do not quote. And it's one of those things that students struggle with, because the thing that you're talking about is so technical and you feel like, well, I don't know how to paraphrase this. That's the challenge. You need to get into it and learn well enough to be able to paraphrase something that seems like gibberish. So don't quote it. That's my very practical piece of advice.
I would be in big trouble. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Thais Ruffin. I'm in the Department of Education here at UNC Asheville. How many of you like sharing information with others? Building knowledge? Raise your hands. Possible. How many of you like going step by step and explaining to folks how to do something? Let me see. Okay. How many of you are creative and innovative? You try to figure out what can work for you, but you're creative in that you're also trying to figure out, well, one way just won't cut it. Doesn't have to be cookie cutter. I also have the ability to think about how it might work for you or how it might work for you, because you get energy, your adrenaline gets going when it's like, oh, it's not all the same. I get to be dynamic. It's not cookie cutter. Well, think about teacher education. At UNC Asheville, in our education department, we're unique because education can encompass a lot of things at bigger schools. You can enter a Department of Education or a School of Education or a College of Education, and they have counseling. They have rehabilitation counseling, school counseling. They have teacher education, and so forth. At UNCA, we only have teacher preparation. So I want you to think about teachers. Teachers you've had in the past, teachers you have now. My job at UNCA is to work with students that would like to become K-12 teachers in a variety of areas. Science teachers, English language arts teachers, social studies teachers, math teachers, health and PE teachers, theater arts teachers, art teachers. I feel like I'm missing someone. World languages teachers as well. So for us in education, our writing is a little different for teacher preparation. Right now I have 5 student teachers placed throughout our area. I have student teachers at Madison Middle School, Asheville High, Asheville Middle School, North Buncombe Middle School, and Valley Springs Middle School in South Asheville. Guess what types of writings I'm receiving right now in their final apprenticeship before we recommend them to the state of North Carolina to become the teacher they want to be. Right now I have a person under apprenticeship for a middle school math teacher, and my other 4 all would like to become middle school or high school social studies teachers. What types of writings are you engaged in right now? Lesson planning and reflections. So every Sunday by 11:55 p.m., I get lesson plans as significant in their writing, saying, what do you plan to do in the diverse classroom, where you have students from different cultural backgrounds, you have students from different racial ethnic backgrounds, students from different socioeconomic statuses, students that are either English language learners, students that are gifted learners, students that are students with disabilities or differences in ability, or the student that we call the regular student. They don't have any special title or any special plan. But when you have all of those folks in a classroom with the content that you love, whether it's in a science class in computer science or with history or the social studies or the sciences, guess what? The job as the teacher is to figure out the innovation, the creativity. How do I get this notion of inquiry and building knowledge and expertise and understanding so that every person from all those groups have what? Understanding? You all remember? So lesson planning, which encompasses a review of the literature. Our students are often requested to write journal article reviews. They're often requested to produce annotated bibliographies. Where you all do that in Lane 120? Sound familiar? where you are looking at sources and you're writing descriptive paragraphs, then you're looking at sources and you're evaluating and critiquing them and doing an evaluative paragraph, you're judging the usefulness of it. Because as educators, we must use evidence-based practices. So we're a profession in our writing where we're reviewing literature for the student in particular on what's out there that's best practice, because when they're standing in front of classrooms and facilitating instruction, they're having to tap into all those best practices to meet diverse learners. What else beyond things like lesson plans? And sometimes lesson plans can be pretty long when you have to come up, what are the objectives of the lesson? What do you hope to accomplish at the end? What are the goals of the lesson? What are the activities that you're going to do? It can't be all direct instruction where you get up and then you explain and you elaborate. What are you going to do for flexible grouping, where you have your students make sense of material through experiential ways, through technology, through readings? What are you going to do to differentiate for your students to make sure all are getting this information, because everybody's different, right? We're diverse, unique. Along with lesson plans, I'm also getting right now in their final apprenticeship, interesting enough, reflection papers. What do they have to do? At the end of the week, they have to tell me an analysis of a lesson. What went well, what didn't go well, pinpoint from data that you collected, whether you did a Kahoot, whether you did a poll everywhere, whether you did an exit slip. Are your students actually understanding what you're teaching? How do you monitor their progress so that the next day you can do a new activity, you can reteach, or you can do what? Move on. Or the next day you might come in with a grouping and you have some students who are in advance doing this, some students who need some more skill building doing this, and some student at the basic level getting some scaffolding. You have to think about all of that, and they have to write and reflect on that, following the template saying, can I analyze, diagnose, pinpoint, and monitor the progress of my students and decide what I'm going to do in my next lesson? Beyond lesson planning and reflection papers, which is all time consuming, our students are invited to make sure that they also are able to do the journal article reviews, the annotated bibliographies, and our students sometimes write op-eds as well. How many of you are fans of op-eds? Because I heard op-ed here too. So what is this op-ed? Right now in a course of students, we're talking about different instructional approaches for diverse learners in the classroom. And I've asked students to take a stand in terms of advocacy. Write about this notion of this concept called sheltered instruction that's typically advocated for English language learners. But many of my students have said, why is it limited to English language learners? I think all students could benefit from something called sheltered instruction. Whether you're a gifted learner, you're a student with a disability, you're an English language learner, whatever. So I said, write an op-ed advocating with your position as an advocacy piece around sheltered instruction. Why is this important? And then some students go, why are op-eds important, Dr. Ruffin? Why do we need to advocate or be persuasive? Because guess what? All the little kids in the classroom have people that they go home to. And who are those people, everyone? And parents come in at a certain point of the year, do these things called what? Where parents ask questions. Conferences. And as an astute teacher scholar, you should be able to say what? Here are the approaches, here's the evidence, and you need to be able to do what with the parents? Talk to them about it in an astute manner, persuade them, and also share evidence that what you're doing is based on research pieces, but it's also advocated and considered a best practice in our field. So op-ed gives you great practice at that for the work you'll have to do with parents. It's hard to contain me, so don't worry. For me, and I'm probably over my time, in terms of my research, is that I've written journal articles, book chapters, and op-eds. And as a professional, of course, I've moved beyond the lesson plan writing or the reflections, but we do in education have commercially produced packages of lesson plans. So there are people in education who produce them as examples so that teachers who are very busy during the day can pick up and say, oh, a former teacher read this, and this person taught for how many years, and now they're an intellectual in the academy, and they've given us a template here that we can pick up and either implement or we can adapt to suit our needs. My research has been around kids with disabilities, with assistive technology, reading, and culturally diverse approaches. And it served me well to be able to write both journal articles and peer-reviewed sources, as well as book chapters to promote evidence-based practices for today's diverse K-12 classroom. And I'm sure you'll have questions, and I've wowed you enough. I like interaction. I like people asking questions. So that's it for now. I look forward to great questions, and I hope that some of you would like to be educators. For me, teaching is a noble profession, which is the precursor to many other professions. Having strong K-12 people that can make sure that we have a democracy for the common good and willing to educate the next generation for our great democracy. So thank you.
Give a round of applause. For this is the fourth time I've done this writing and disciplines panel, and I think at the end of every panel, I think, these are the best panelists. But then I get a new bunch in next semester, and they're fabulous. So I'm sure you guys have a lot of questions. Go ahead, fire away.
You gotta call.
Jessica, are you running?
You gotta-
We can
you
call
gotta
on
call
people.
someone.
Sure, yeah.
My question was initially for Professor Morales, but anyone can answer. I was wondering how you guys choose topics for your research.
Well, I can take it first, I guess.
Yeah.
That's an interesting question. So for me, I focus on American politics, and so when I decided to get, major in political science and get my PhD in political science, I knew I wanted to study American politics, and I knew that I wanted to study like the presidency and Congress. Those are the things I study in detail. And so for me, the way I find topics is through reading past literature. So most of the writing process for me is just actually consuming what other people have written. And that takes up a lot of my time, but also reading what's going on in the news. So while I said I don't study politics, I do get inspired by things I read in the news or new things that the president has done or that Congress has done. And then so if I read something in the news that really intrigues me, I'll go see if other people have researched that. And I'll start like spinning off ideas that kind of come from previous research, because the sciences are very incremental. We kind of build off what other people have already done rather than reinventing the wheel over and over. And so I like to have a nice base of what other people have done and kind of see holes in their research and kind of try to fill them with my own research questions. I think one thing that's probably true across all fields is that finding a good research topic is kind of a frustrating process, because you want to explain the world. You want your research project to be the most exciting thing that has ever happened, and what you realize is that for a research project to be executable, you have to find a nice narrow topic that you can actually kind of get in depth about and do a thorough job on. So when I was proposing my dissertation proposal to my committee in grad school, I had this great topic that I thought they were going to approve, and they were like, Ashley, you cannot explain the entire world. You have to pick a very small piece of that. And so one thing to do is just read the literature and then go talk to people about your idea, especially seniors who have done it more so than you have. And that's kind of how you help formulate a question. But it's a process. It's the hardest part of the process, I think. Yeah, no problem.
Does anyone else want to speak to that question, or should we move on?
I mean, it's really different in the sciences because you're kind of following a path where when you enter grad school, you have an option to look through what everybody who works there does, because you don't get to invent your own question. You look at what other people are working on and think about the thing that's the most exciting to you. I started out grad school as an immunology major I suppose, and I went and rotated in a lab and I got bored to tears, and I was like, you know what I think is fun? The brain seems fun. I'll go find somebody that works on the brain. And I interviewed with a bunch of people, and the person that I felt like the most exciting work was this person that worked on pheromones in mice. Nobody gives a crap about pheromones in mice, but a very select few of people, and I'm one of those people now. I just it was more, the paradigm was interesting, and I know it's ridiculous, and if you actually hear what I work on, it's even more ridiculous, but the paradigm was interesting. It was something that was not really well understood. That was what was my driving force, is I don't want to do something where there's like 7 assays and I run through the assays and then I get a paper and it's done. I wanted to invent science. And so I liked doing neuroscience for that reason, because so much of this is just completely unknown, and so you get to invent ways to ask questions. And so for those of you that are considering being in the sciences while you're here, you're not going to come up with some big research project and go to a PI and be like, hey, do this, because it costs money. So you go and talk to the people here and say, what do you work on? And you find the person that you're like, that seems cool, and I think I can work on that. And so you can work within that field then to find some piece of it that's exciting to you, and that involves doing a stupid amount of reading. But yeah, you don't get to just go out into the world and discover a new thing, because there's specific skill sets you have to know to be able to accomplish science in that way.
I would say don't count out passion. As I think about my field of special education, I was a high school special ed teacher, and then later on I pursued my doctorate in curriculum and instruction, specializing in special ed. It was passion that carried me through that dissertation. I knew a lot about special education, working with kids with disabilities. I had a social justice framework. I said it's not right that they're marginalized and they're disenfranchised and they're oppressed within the public education system, where they have these other classes, they get pulled out, and then sometimes they're forgotten. And that fueled me, that when I reached the dissertation stage, I thought, is there a group within the disability community in special education in K-12, something I'm passionate about, social justice, where my research will serve humanity well for the betterment? And while I was studying, I found out that there was a Somali community of 25,000 in Columbus, Ohio, 60 miles from my university, Ohio University. And that this Somali community in Columbus were having issues with the K-12 system for being African immigrant refugees with disabilities, where people were like, well, I know they're Sunni Muslim. What's their take on disability? Are they shamed? Is it taboo? Are they not getting immunized? Is that why there's an explosion of autism? And so I took it upon myself through my social justice lens, my passion, and say, I care about making a better world for people with disabilities. Let me go there, introduce myself. And then I showed them that I was interested in working with their community for the betterment of their kids and figuring out how to better connect with the local public school system, that I took it upon myself to study Somali for 4 weeks in the summer through a fellowship, where I was able to immerse myself in the language to prove to them that I was passionate and I was dedicated, and I want my research to truly make a difference. Even though it ended up being a niche area, not too many people had done it, my dissertation committee was happy about that, but for me, what do you see yourself as truly making a difference, contributing to in such a profound way that you would be proud of, but not only you would be proud of, other people would benefit from it?
I know that when I was in high school, I saw this show called Small Wonder, and I'm thinking that I might be dating myself a lot here.
I watched that show, so.
Yeah. But it's a show about this man who created this little android, and the android was his daughter. Okay, he was passing her off as his daughter, and there was a whole little bunch of scenarios around trying to prevent everybody else from figuring out that she was an android. So my dream at one point was I was going to first be a high school teacher, and decided that I didn't have the personality to withstand middle school or high school. I figured they would run me away. So the next dream was like, you know, I love math and I love computers, so I was going to build my own android. That's what I was going to do. And I thought that, you know, one day I was going to have a child, and it was going to be so easy. I was going to study the child, and I was going to watch the child and make my android. I mean, that's I've had 2 and a couple of grandbabies now, and that has not worked out. When I got into grad school, by then I had moved on from Small Wonder and was definitely Lieutenant Commander Data from Star Trek Next Generation, and decided that he was too complicated for me to make. So I was going to focus on Lieutenant Commander Data's eyes. I was going to make his eyes. I was going to go into computer vision. And of course I was going to come up with the program that was going to recognize every object and be able to interpret the image and identify everything and everything, have all the knowledge and the concepts that's supposed to go along with that. And it didn't take long for my advisor to go, Moretta, you need to narrow that a little bit more, okay? And so my dissertation narrowed to recognizing, it was still object recognition, but it was recognizing the uniform polyhedron, it was 80 of them, okay, using alpha shapes. And everybody's going, whoa, whoa. We won't, just say it got narrowed in very specific way of doing that, okay? I would say to any of you, it starts off with having that motivation and that passion for the big question and the big ideas, okay? And then figuring out how you can contribute to that, okay? One of the things that you've heard each of the panelists say is that you have to do the research, okay? You have to look at what has been done out there. And even in saying to my, my graduate advisor, because I was so busy, interested in working on my code and getting my software to work, okay? And he looks at me and he goes, Moretta, what good is making out making a discovery, coming up with this great algorithm, and no one else in the world, or very few people in the world, know about it, okay? I mean, the scientific writing definitely is a way of informing your colleagues of your contribution to the world, that you are aware of their contributions and that you are contributing. I will say that when my colleague says that our writing is very informative and objective and to the point, she's not saying it has to be boring, okay? I mean, you do not have to make it such that I'm going to fall asleep just by looking at it. I mean, there's the things that you're hearing from the other disciplines about avoiding passive voice. That works in the quantitative fields also, okay, where you're looking to be more action, okay? So you want people to read, you want your writing to be clear, you want it to be precise, accurate, and objective, but you want people to understand on that. So, yeah, that's a lot to put in on. Got that passion thing to go on.
And I guess history is a little different because in history you can write about whatever you want to write about.
Like Moonshine.
Yeah, and so you don't, and historians can sort of work by themselves. You don't need a lot of grant money, you don't need a lot of equipment, you need access to libraries or sources. Yeah. In my case, I actually started with those sort of big ideas, and then I just kept going with those big ideas, which is sort of possible. So my work has been on early Chinese history, on a historian who was one of the fundamental shapers of Chinese culture for 2,000 years. And because, and I wrote a book trying to sort of explain him in ways that hadn't been thought of before, but it's really a major kind of figure. In recent years, I've been writing on things on American religion because it caught my attention, and particularly my own religious tradition, and my goal is to change my own religious tradition in fundamental ways with regard to world scripture. We'll see how that goes, but sometimes that's possible at even a place like UNCA. When students choose topics for history, sometimes they want to write about things that they're curious about, that they haven't heard about in class, or things they have heard about in class, but they want to know more about and go into more detail. Both of those are okay. The constraint is always sources. It's like, what a great question. It would be marvelous if we could know that about the past, but you've got to have sources. You can't just if you just make it up, then you should go to the literature department, and they're good at that, and those kind of talents are really well rewarded there. But in our discipline, you've got to find some sources. So that's always sort of the challenge, is matching what you want to write about, what you want to know, with what you can find as evidence.
Thank you. I think there was another question in the back.
Yeah, it's not about writing, it's for the education person.
Yes.
Could you explain what sheltered instruction is?
Sheltered instruction is a method used for English language learners where you shelter whatever you're teaching through graphic, visual, and sensory support so that English language learners can benefit from your content, vocabulary, specialized content knowledge. So if you're teaching an English class and you want to make, well, you're teaching a science class and you want to make it a sheltered science class for 8th grade, how do you scaffold and shelter that instruction with all of those different supports that are necessary for the English language learner that might not have great English proficiency to benefit from that lesson? So if you're talking about mitochondrial DNA and RNA in your science lesson, do you have, in sheltering that, do you have a picture step by step of the process? Do you have a video simulation showing how the DNA goes to this DNA? So again, visual, graphic, sensory scaffolds and supports that you add in within your instruction, that you cannot teach it in a unidimensional way. It has to be multi-sensory with many supports. That's how you're sheltering it for them.
Well, yeah, everyone should have that.
Everyone should have that. That's what my students have. They go, this approach for this
we all do
group,
that.
this approach, we have this, we have differentiated instruction, we have sheltered instruction and education, we have different scholars saying this is good for particular types of learners based on their research, and oftentimes my students say it's good for all. So how can we actually share that with parents if we had to, or in an op-ed as an advocacy piece, that can we really start doing some overlapping without singling things to one person or one group of people?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I was just curious, in each of your guys' disciplines, like what would you consider if you could get a good piece of writing or a paper, what would make that paper an A? Like what would make that paper, not even when you're grading it for students, just when you're reading it and going, that is exactly what, it makes sense, it illustrates an argument. Like in each of your fields, what would qualify as a great paper, I guess?
Miranda, you want to start?
Wow.
Why not?
Looking down the line.
For me, it depends on the type of writing I'm reading, okay? If I am reading an opinion piece, okay, I am looking for something that, again, clear, I understand it. It makes an argument, it credits its sources, okay? It avoids jargon. It's accurate. Okay, even with opinion, it still would be accurate, and I understand it, and it recognizes that other perspectives exist, okay? And it acknowledges these other perspectives in a respective way, and kind of reduces as much of an antagonistic tone as possible, okay? If I'm in a flame war on Facebook, okay, I can deal with the antagonistic thing, but in a paper, I would say that it would be, professional to have a very balanced tone. If I am reading a journal article, I am looking for, we have the parts of it that goes on. So you have the abstract, which, again, it limit on the words, okay? But to make sure that it gives an accurate summary of the paper, we're using that abstract to determine whether or not we want to know more and how, if this article is going to contribute to the project that I'm working on, okay? So the abstract has to be clear, concise, precise, accurate. Like my colleague, I'm not looking for once upon a time, in the beginning, 100 years ago, cut to the chase and give me what's, here's the problem, here's the approach, these are our conclusions in that abstract, okay? In the introduction, I'm looking for the once upon a time in terms of motivation, okay? And that why is this problem? So in terms of, if I mentioned to you my object recognition on polyhedron and using alpha shapes, just looking at that title, why do I care, okay? This is a part of object recognition. This is a first step and it adheres, to put that in as far as introduction is concerned, okay? In the literature review, it's going to be good that you demonstrate demonstrate your intellectual humility. Recognize that you are not the first person to consider this problem. You are not the only one. You will not be the last one to work on this problem, okay? You are not the end all, okay? That you are recognizing your colleagues in this field. You are recognizing their contributions. You are recognizing how it informs future work or your current work. You're recognizing what problems exist, okay? What issues are not addressed in a respectful way, okay? In terms of the part where you are talking about your approaches, again, you give exactly what your steps are, what the processes are. Where did you get these processes from? Okay, your source of those processes. How did you follow that? And in your conclusion, your results, you give us as accurately and precisely as you can what those results are. Okay, and I too love a good visual. Okay, so
Yeah.
So yes, give us an accurate. I mean, again, I can't stress that enough as far as statistics is concerned, any of your analysis. We all know that we can lie and put any type of interpretation with images, make sure that we remove those biases on that, okay? Make sure that you do things in an accurate way and understand what the perspective is, okay? And in the conclusion, acknowledge what you have contributed, okay? Acknowledge what issues are still there. So intellectual honesty is quite important to me. Okay, so does that kind of? Okay.
And what I would add to that from an education perspective would be implications for practice. I tell my students, great that you've done the literature review, you've reviewed sources, you have a coherent and logical argument, you stated the findings, you have the rationale, but now what? Because I am concerned with you standing in front of 25 students, 100 students you may be responsible for the semester. What are the implications for practice? What do you see you doing as a mediating or mitigating issue with whatever you just discovered? Now show me how it's applied.
For science papers, just one last thing. It's going to be different if I'm looking at student writing, obviously, because I'm going to look at all the different pieces. But as a professional, if I'm reading a paper, I'm hitting the abstract and then going directly to the figures. Standalone figures are what make good papers. If I can just read your figure and figure legend, and I know what you did, why you did it, and how it worked out, that's great. I'm going to have to sort through billions of pages of your opinion about it, right? So the visual there and the interpretation within that space is what really makes it. And across the board, I would say accessibility of the information that you're trying to present. Are you writing for the audience that you're supposed to write for? A wiki article cannot look the same as a journal article, right? And so that's what makes it a good piece of writing.
For history, and I think we probably share a lot, I'm sure I would share it with the social science, but just really sort of succinctly, first, your writing has to make sense. Like the mechanics, I have to be able to figure out what you're trying to say. Like if you can make sense, you'll get kind of a C, okay? Like I can sort of figure out that there's an idea there, and the grammar sort of works out okay.
So that was my problem.
If you are, it's been my problem too. If you are able to say something that is clear and that is fairly succinct, that just doesn't go on, and has a good use of evidence, so I can see like what your argument is, and then that's like a B paper. For an A paper, I'm going to want you to say something insightful. I'm going to want to be sort of surprised. I'm going to want to see something new, to see some creative things going on there. For practical advice, maybe for everybody, I think the best thing that you can do is to write a paper, or as you're writing, give yourself enough time to write and then to read it out loud. That's what I do, because I can catch a lot of errors so I shut the door in my office, and then I read out loud what's on my computer screen, and then the way that I write on the computer. I have an outline. I have a sort of sense of where I'm going, but I will write a couple sentences, and then I'll read it out loud, and then I'll think, what's the next idea that should come? And then I try to imagine, if somebody's reading this, what's the next thing they're going to want me to say, or what's the kind of objection? What are they going to be, what am I not saying that I need to address somehow? And I will read sentences dozens of times, and then I'll write another sentence, and then I'll read it from the paragraph again, like again and again, and it's terrifically slow. But that's the way you get an argument that I think holds together, and then I think makes sense to whoever you think you're writing for, because audience is really important.
Yeah, I want to second almost everything he said. I think that's really good advice. And I think for me, the top papers are the papers I get that are, first of all, interesting. Like, I don't want to think that you picked that topic because you had to pick the topic. That might be the case, but fool me. Make me think this topic is super interesting, and the papers that get the best grades in my class are usually the ones that just like make me think about something a little bit differently than I did before, or at least challenge the way I think about things. And I don't think any of the kind of advice I have is particular to political science, but the thing I care about the most is probably just like how well written and logical something is. And so what I tell my students, like, this is not a mystery novel. Like, I should know in the first paragraph what you're going to tell me through the rest of the paper. If I have to dig for your argument, that's a C at best. And so what I tell them is, like, you should never just sit down and write a paper. I want my students to sit down and write step by step every logical step of their argument. So I actually show them how I did that for my dissertation. I'm like, step 1, here's the first step of my logic. Step 2, and for every paper I write, I do that same thing, and then I say, oh, now I can go write this because I know where I'm going with this argument. So I think outlining is important, and I guarantee you that all the professors in this room can tell which students outline before they write. Like, we can tell. It's very, very obvious. And just to be very clear and to the point, like, don't put fluffy, especially since we do kind of mimic the sciences. Like, it is somewhat persuasive, but we don't need to hear about what happened in, like, 1600 if you're talking about something that happened in 1980, like that kind of thing. And what I consistently get in my student evaluations every semester is, we don't understand why she cares so much about grammar. This isn't an English class. And what I want to say is that proofreading and grammar are important regardless of what field you're in. It just helps you communicate more effectively. And I am a stickler. If somebody has, mistakes in their writing, like, and I'm not talking about one mistake. If you have consistent mistakes, you will not get an A on a paper in my class.
I mean, part of that is also just respect, right?
Yes.
How much
Yeah.
do you respect the work that you're turning into me and my time?
Right.
If you can't even be bothered to just run spell check, for God's sake. It's going to catch most of the things.
That's true.
And sometimes students don't, and that, tells me that you wrote it the night before and you just did not care, and that matters.
Yeah, fool us if you're writing the night before.
Yeah.
At least spend an hour reading over it right before class.
Let me second writing from an outline too, which is really, really helpful for students. When I talked about my writing, I actually tend not to write from an outline because I'm sort of pushing some things and I'm not exactly sure where we'll go, but I come in on a Saturday and I will spend 7 hours and I will write 1 page. You don't have that kind of time, because you're not writing for something that's going to be published by a major university press that's going to set a field for, but you need an outline because you've got to get things done. You have more than one class, you have more than one paper that's due.
Well, I would also second the outline, and actually a little bit more than a skeleton outline at that. I mean, it's something that has at least complete sentences in different places. But one thing that I would like to add as far as just tangible advice, try maybe in your first draft, fine, but number one, don't write the paper the night before. Okay, give yourself some time, because whatever you write the night before is crap. I mean, I think that's true for every one of us sitting up here, for all of us. Whatever you write the night before is not going to be really publishable, okay? Give yourself some time to do a draft, a second draft, a third draft, and then get a wonderful person to proofread it, okay? Next thing on that is, every writing article that you do is not going to be the same way that you speak. So, for example, I have a student who say, I came up with this idea, okay? Now, in talking with each other, we all know what he means, okay? I came up with this idea and I ran with it. Do not put that in a paper. okay? I mean, if your first draft, fine. Your second draft, see that's a colloquialism? Forgive me if I'm saying that the wrong way, but look at it and go, what is really, am I running down the street with an idea? I mean, change it to, we developed this idea, or I originated this idea, okay?
Use a
Or-
thesaurus.
Please use the thesaurus, okay? But watch out on writing the way, because we all do it. The first thing that I write, I speak in my, the colloquialisms, I say some slang terms, and I go back and immediately start looking for them and taking them out. And I can't say enough about, we are developing, I mean, why are you developing? It says we develop, okay? We are creating, we create, okay? Yeah, come get rid of as much of those verbal beings as you can with that. So got to put a plug out here. There are grammar analyzers on the web. So for those of you that are looking for the passive voice analyzer, do a Google search on passive voice analyzer. Type in, copy and paste your article, and it will give you all of the passive voice violations that you have.
And I plug also for the writing center.
I was going to say, Marietta said, get a friend to read it over. If you don't have friends, go to the Writing Center. If you have friends, you should still go to the Writing Center. You should go to the Writing Center. Here's how it works in my class. If you go to the Writing Center will send me, as your professor, a note saying, this student came in, this is what we talked about. And sometimes students are a little nervous because they know that I'm going to know that when I get a note like that, I take out my grade book and I put a little check by that student's name. It doesn't count for extra points or something, but if a student is kind of on the edge in between a grade or something, and I see a check there, I give them the benefit of the doubt because I know that student worked, that student tried to do it. So it is to your benefit to go to the Writing Center.
I give extra credit for going. I give 2 extra
She's
points
way
in every
nicer than
paper.
I give it consideration. That's what I was going to say, Writing Center. And I benefited from that as a first-generation college student. My university had something called the College Adjustment Achievement Program, and I went to the Writing Center. There's no shame in that. That's peer support. That's additional scaffolding to help you achieve whatever you need to achieve. And I'd like to add with the outlining piece, in case you think traditional outlining is boring, check out Inspiration software, because in my field of special ed, but this can apply to everyone, that there's something called Inspiration where you can do outlining in graphic form, in visual form, multiple ways. It doesn't have to be the traditional outline form. So Inspiration software, my students can submit an outline to me using visual mapping software, and it's a great outline in a digital format other than the traditional one. All the best.
And I'm going to be cognizant of time. I think there's a class coming in at 1:20, and I know that some of you have to get off to classes. I'd like us, first of all, before we applaud and everybody heads on their way, I want to remind everyone that if you've not signed in, please make sure that you signed in so that your professor it gets notified that you were here, that you attended, and you were able to hear from our panelists today. So make sure you do that before you leave. And then let's also thank our panelists one more time. A round of